Welcome to Follow Your Curiosity. Ordinary people, extraordinary creativity. Here's how to get unstuck. I'm your host, creativity coach Nancy Norbeck. Let's go. Before we get started today, I'm wondering, have you ever deliberately done something badly? Sounds crazy, right? But hear me out. It is no exaggeration to say that giving yourself permission to do something badly can change your life, and not in a bad way. I'm almost 2 weeks into an experiment, writing an intentionally bad poem every day for 30 days. I'm posting all the poems and my thoughts about them, the process, and whatever else I'm noticing on YouTube, and I've added a link to the playlist to the show notes. I'd love for you to join me in this unexpectedly empowering process that gives your inner critic a rest, which lets your creativity flow more freely. Folks have already been posting their own bad poems, many of which are actually not bad at all, in the comments, and you are welcome to join them. The experiment ends on November 22nd. Hope to see you there. Meg Hamand has had a heart for storytelling since her first poem was published in an anthology in elementary school. Since then, she's been published in multiple print and online publications, and her debut novel is the award-winning Diamonds in Auschwitz, which simultaneously tells 2 stories of love, survival, and hope during World War II. Meg joins me to talk about the challenges of working with dark and difficult topics such as taking care of yourself and navigating the line between too much and too little for your readers, plotting historical fiction, and how to do historical research. She also gives us a sneak peek into her next book, which is currently in progress. Here's my conversation with Meg Hammond. Meg, welcome to Follow Your Curiosity.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
I ask everyone the same question. Were you a creative kid, or did you discover your creative side later on?
I was a creative kid. I honestly can't remember when I decided I wanted to be a writer, but I do remember at age 10 starting my first air quote book. It was a memoir because I had my appendix taken out. So obviously it was a page turner. But that was when I really wanted to become a writer. In 5th grade, I had like a poem published, and then that was it. I just went from there. I always really thought that it would be more nonfiction. I went to school for creative writing and journalism. So I was a big fan of, I still am, Truman Capote's In Cold Blood, kind of that creative nonfiction genre that he had created. And Eric Larson does an amazing job with that type of book. But that's a lot of research. So I'm going to stick with historical fiction so I can do the research and really, use these great real events, but also make it up as I go.
That's fair. That's very fair.
I think it's a nice mix of both.
Yeah. And I had to giggle when you mentioned your appendix story because somewhere lost to the mists of time was the book that I wrote when my brother had the chicken pox about someone whose wife had the chicken pox. And, when I was in 4th grade. So somewhere there is a little library for kids who wrote medical stories when they were in elementary school.
We're probably of the generation with like the sick lit, right? I read a lot of books of like terminal cancer patients that were teenagers. I don't know why. I think at one point my mom was like, stop reading these.
Yeah, it is an unusual trend, for want of a better word. Yeah. In fact, I remember there was a little golden book that they gave me when I had my tonsils out when I was in kindergarten called No More Tonsils. I think to get me ready for it, but all of the medical stuff in it was like from the 50s. So wasn't really like that when I had done.
I guess if you're prepared for that, what happened had to have been easier.
Well, all they really told me was that I would get to eat all the ice cream I wanted. They, the going in and having people cut things out, it really didn't enter into it a whole lot. So anyway, so you decided that you were going to write historical fiction.
Yeah. It's my favorite genre to read. I mean, I do read a little bit of everything, but I love historical nonfiction and historical fiction a lot. So I think that's where I read things and I find out about a real event or a real person. And I just think I need more. I need to know more about it. So that's where I'm finding a lot of my inspiration.
That seems fair. Yeah, absolutely. So when did you actually officially decide this was a real thing you were going to pursue?
Well, it's probably been about 4 years ago that the idea for Diamonds in Auschwitz, my first book, came to me. I mean, it hit me like a bolt of lightning. I'm driving down the road and I couldn't get this image out of my head from a nonfiction book that I had read by Wendy Holden called Born Survivors. And it's about women who go into Auschwitz who are pregnant. And it's their story. And she just briefly mentions that one woman had held on to her engagement ring through the Nazi occupation in the Jewish ghetto. And as she's, coming into Auschwitz, she's like, I'm just not letting these Nazis have this ring. They've taken everything from me. They're not getting this ring. So she just drops it in the ground. And then, the book continues. And that's not, of course, the point of the book. But that I just couldn't stop thinking about it. And I was like, oh, it'd be so terrible if a prison guard picked it up and all was for naught, right? But then I started thinking, what if a prisoner had picked it up? And this beautiful diamond engagement ring, it's not worth anything inside, the gates of Auschwitz. You can't trade it for its value. You can't eat it. It can't get you out. It's not going to keep you warm. But what would it do? Like, how could it change your life? How could it save you? So the ring is just the embodiment of hope and resilience and fighting through the worst conditions in life. And so the story revolves on two sets of characters. The woman who finds the ring in the very beginning in the mud in Auschwitz. She's already a prisoner, has already lost her family to the Nazis in World War II. So it's her finding this ring and really, waking her up out of this fog, this daze of, I actually think I'm dead. I'm just waiting to die, and realizing maybe there is still life out there and there's still good things out there. And then the second storyline that mixes in is the man who bought the ring from the jewelry store, gave it to his fiance, and what they went through holding on to it through, again, the Nazi occupation in Prague, the ghetto outside of Prague, and then finally when they go to Auschwitz. So kind of a full circle. The characters' stories are about 2 years apart, but they mix in. You got to work for it. It's pretty subtle, but there's definitely some tie-ins and some connections.
Yeah, it's interesting as you read it because you are kind of putting the puzzle together. It's pretty obvious that there's a connection there, but you're working to go, wait, so how does it all come together? Because it's clearly going to. So yeah. It's kind of an interesting added dimension. You have to work for it a little bit. You don't just get to read the book and go, oh, okay, I'm just going to follow along with this like you usually do. So yeah, it's like, because I kept thinking, okay, so the ring obviously from the beginning is a pretty clear link, but you're still up until the end, you're still kind of going, so how exactly does it end up where it ends up? And it's a cool thing the way that it comes together, because you are wondering all up until the very end.
Yeah,
and I won't
it's at
say
the very end, right?
That.
You have to work for it. That's what I'll say.
Yeah, you really, really do. And yeah, it's there's no other way to say it. It's not cheery subject matter. So you have to work for it in that respect too. And I really found myself wondering what it was like for you to spend that much time in that world. I mean, obviously you have the luxury of leaving that world.
Right.
But still.
Yeah, some scenes especially were very tough to write. I remember writing one scene and I'm crying and sobbing, right? Because you live with these characters. They live inside you. When I'm in a quiet moment, I'm in the book. I'm putting myself in scenes that have yet to be written. So when I finally start writing some of the terrible things that happen, because it's the Holocaust, a lot of terrible things are going to happen to these characters. I'm crying. I remember texting my sister and I said, I just made myself sob. And she's like, I think it's time to walk away. And so that's what I would do. I would literally walk away. I'd go for a walk. I'd go, spend time with my family. I think my reading list was very purposeful during the time that I was writing this. Sometimes I wanted to be immersed in other World War II books because it just helps you kind of continue to live that atmosphere, that time frame, especially, anything in history. So sometimes I would do that. And sometimes I'd be like, I have had too much World War II. I cannot read anymore. So my go-to often, I'm a big James Herriot fan, which is still the time frame-ish, but so happy and lighthearted. And each chapter reads like a little story with a, warm and fuzzy conclusion. So I read a lot of James Herriot over those years.
That seems like such a good choice.
Always. James Herriot is always a good choice.
Well, and if you watch the TV show, whether the original or the current
the
one,
new one,
it's just like wrapping yourself in a fuzzy blanket.
It is. It's comfort food.
Yeah, absolutely. Both of them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I grew up with my mom watching the original one, and I was a little bit reluctant to watch the new one, and then my friends convinced me that I'd probably like it, and now I'm just like, yes, please.
Yeah. And I grew up with my mom reading James Herriot to me.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I just remember having like this nice overall sense of like, I liked it, but I couldn't have told you anything specific about the books. So I started reading them again as an adult, and now they're one of my. It's been a rough couple of weeks. I need something to take the edge off. That would be one of my go-tos.
Well, and they're great because you can just dip in and out of them too.
Yes.
Yeah.
I actually have to pace myself because I haven't read the dog stories and the cat stories, and I've been holding on to it for like over a year because I'm like, but if I read it, then I don't have anything left.
Right. That's the bad thing about stuff like that. You run out. It's not.
I'm rationing myself on James Herriot. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, but still, you're in a really, you picked a dark place to put yourself.
Yeah. And I think that there was a lot of research. I could not have written some of the atrocities that the Nazis had committed without having actually read the real accounts of it. My imagination is not that dark. I was able to write it because I could visualize it after being told. But, some of the things, actually almost all of the cruelties that happened at the hands of the Nazis, I had documented cases that had happened. And, one of them is, you're probably going to know what it's very, very bad. And at one point, a sensitivity reader was like, I think maybe you should think about taking this out. But I had read in multiple cases where the Nazis had done this thing. And I thought, no, we can't take it out because if we water down, the horrors that happened during the Holocaust, 50 or 100 years from now, it's not going to seem like it was so bad.
Amen.
Nazis didn't seem that bad. So as uncomfortable as it is, and so many people are like, I've read different scenes and I had to put your book down and I had to walk away and I had to give it a day or so. And I take that as a compliment, right? Like it's powerful. It's sticking with them. It's uncomfortable. Maybe you don't want to read it, but it's necessary. So.
Absolutely. And I think, right now we're being reminded how necessary things like that are. And in fact, I found it particularly interesting because a good chunk of the book takes place at Terezin. Mm-hmm. And I've been to Terezin.
Oh, wow.
And in fact, I realized while I was reading the book that I've only been to the small fortress, and I was very confused I had to go and look it up and look on a map and see that, oh, right there. Okay, so there was a town. Mm-hmm. And not everyone was in the small fortress, which was where I was, because I was like, there were no streets where I was. Yeah. What is she talking about?
Yeah. It was like a fortress town, originally meant to keep the Germans out.
Irony.
Right? Exactly.
Yeah. And then there was the actual prison.
Yeah.
And, which was not an extermination camp, but yet a heck of a lot of people still died there and went on to worse places. Yeah. But as I was reading it, I was reminded that, my grandparents took multiple trips to Europe, and I can't remember where they were because I know they didn't go to Poland, but they were somewhere, I presume in Germany, that was near one of the camps, and they had an opportunity to go. And I could not believe, I must have been in high school when they made this trip and when they told me about it, that they decided not to go because their tour guide told them that they shouldn't go. It would just upset them, and there was no reason to go. And I remember sitting there thinking, that's kind of the point.
Why you go. Yeah.
That's why you go. Mm-hmm. And, it's been 20 years since I was at Terezin, and I think it was, I don't remember now what year Life is Beautiful came out, but I think it was after I was at, no, it was before I was at Terezin, because I remember walking through there thinking this looks just like the movie. And, just being like, oh my God, like you see the movie.
Yeah.
So you're not really surprised by what it looks like. And yet, when you're standing there, it is still such a different experience. And when you're in the space and the tour guide is explaining to you that not only does it look like this, but here's how it worked. And the horror of it is just real for you in a way that you had understood before, but you hadn't understood before. And so when I think back on the fact that someone would actually, and, this is a story that I heard. I wasn't there. So it's entirely possible that they just didn't want to go and they told me that. I don't know. But either way, they didn't go. And they clearly didn't want to go because it was an easy sell for them if they were told not to take the tour. And I've always felt like, as much as I loved my grandparents, I always felt like that was just like, it's your responsibility and your duty as a citizen of the world, if you have an opportunity to go to a place like that, to go and see it and experience it so that it's real for you and you can pass that on to other people who may not have the chance to go see it. And I don't even like saying have the chance to go see it, because it sounds like, I have like the chance to go to, Hollywood or Disney World or whatever. And it's obviously not the same thing, but it just feels like a responsibility that you should take that trip and you should go. And there's a moment in your book where the children are drawing and the child draws a butterfly. And because I was at Terezin, I knew exactly, I was pretty sure, and I didn't get confirmation until I read the acknowledgments at the end of the book.
Yeah.
But there is a famous collection of artwork from Terezin called I Never Saw Another Butterfly. And as soon as I've read about the butterfly in the book, I was like, oh, she's read the book.
I have. I knew nothing about Terezin before I started research for this. I chose Prague as my setting almost on a whim, because I had done some research of like, where are the geographical locations that filtered into Auschwitz? And Prague was one of them. And I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. So I did a little basic research. And for a book about art and beauty and, the embodiment of hope and creativity, Prague is the perfect place to set, a story like Diamonds in Auschwitz. So I got to dig into the architecture and just the rich history of Prague. And it had a really unique place in World War II history because it was fairly preserved for a city, right? The Germans didn't come in and bomb it. It was just handed to them. And they did a pretty good job of keeping it intact structurally wise, right? So I decided, okay, we're going to do Prague. And then obviously, I quickly moved my research to Terezin because that's the next possible location for my characters to go. And I fell in love is not the right word, but the situation in Terezin, again, was just absolute serendipity for the book, because it was filled with a lot of artists and musicians and college professors. And this is the true thing. This is not Megan writing stuff. And that was really neat. And then I found out about the art class with the book and the collection of artwork. And then I found about the art teacher who is featured in my book, and 100% true, real character who smuggled in bits of paper into Terezin rather than food and clothing and blankets for herself, knowing that these children needed an outlet for all the horrific things that they were witnessing and experiencing. And so she taught that art class. At one point from my research, it was under the permission of the Nazis, and then it was not. And she still continued to teach it. And she did that until she was sent out of Terezin. And so I just thought, like, that is this beautiful way to resist and to, give something to the children. And 15,000 children went through Terezin, and it's said about 100 of them survived. So clearly these children needed that extra outlet, that extra sense, that little bit of sense of security that they had while they were in the art class. So that was a really important part for me in the book. And, it's a small part, but also just wanting people to know that those children had lived and had done these great things, and the art teacher had lived and had done this great thing. And that's how we can help keep them alive.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think the foresight that she had to do that is amazing, especially because one of the things that your book makes clear is, how much people did not realize where they were really going and what was going to happen when they got there. And yet she clearly did.
I mean, how could you? How could you fathom
Right.
that people are trying to exterminate an entire culture from the from the face of the earth, and that others were letting it happen?
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's really unfathomable. And you're right. So many of the characters are just like, they cannot believe it. The proof is being told to them. They're seeing these things and they just keep thinking, well, my one character, my set of characters, Samuel and Hannah, the ones who are engaged, keep saying they can't kill all of us because, like, surely they cannot kill all of us.
Right.
They're trying.
Right. And there is a moment toward the beginning of the book where they're having the conversation with some of their friends about, we need to get out of here. No, you're just being, overly, what's the word I want?
Paranoid.
Yeah. Excitable, whatever. And it turns out, yeah, they all should have gotten out. And also, there's a moment of major betrayal in the book that is a wake-up call for some folks. And that kind of thing also, it's not a surprise because anyone who's paid attention to history ever knows that kind of thing happened. And in fact, that kind of thing was encouraged. And yet it's still a really big moment, and you don't want that to happen. And again, reading it now, that kind of thing has happened again throughout the history since World War II. It's happening in places around the world now. You never know where else it might happen. And it gives you real pause to read about that, because as much as we hear never again, things have happened again, not on as large a scale, but they have happened again. Ugh.
I know, it's heavy.
It's hard to talk about this without going to dark places.
Yeah, it's a heavy book.
It is.
For sure. A lot of friends were taking it on spring break because it came out in, right before spring break. And they're like, my spring break read. And I, of course, am not deterring them because please buy the book, Diamonds in Auschwitz. But it's not like a beach read.
No. I mean, you could read it on the beach. I'm the kind of person who might read it on the beach.
Free to read it wherever you want. But if you're thinking that this is like a fun, easy spring break, it's not.
It's not that. It's definitely not that. You want to know that that's not what you're getting before you start reading it, for sure. Though it's worth reading. I think,
thank you.
The more we remind ourselves, the better off we are. Yeah. Though you don't want to do it to the point where, it's bad for you, but still. How did you keep yourself, and we talked about taking breaks and things like that, but how did you strike that balance? Because you mentioned trying to make sure that the things that you put in the book were things that happened, but still, that's tough reading.
Yeah. The one thing after I finished it, I just kept thinking it needs a little more levity, which it's so hard to put it in there, right? And then you don't want it to come off as forced. So I will say one of the ways that I try to balance it is, the little girl Haya, who befriends Rachel in Auschwitz. And it's hard to think of how a little girl in Auschwitz could be, kind of the lighthearted release that we need. But she's really held on to her playfulness and her curiosity and her childlike innocence because she spent the majority of the war in a cellar by herself, which is sad, but she was kind of protected in a way. And so she kind of comes into Auschwitz as like a brand new life form, right? She hasn't experienced anything. And children are resilient, and her just natural personality is friendly. And she's breaking down all these walls that Rachel had built around herself to keep her own heart intact and to stay, distant from other people. And I really liked, one scene, and I kind of added it, and it was just really quick, where Rachel refuses to speak to her bunkmate. She doesn't want to have anything to do with her. She doesn't want to get to connect to anybody else. And within like 5 minutes, Haya's like, "Hey, I'm Haya. This is Rachel. What's your name?" And Rachel's like, "Ugh, I tried so hard to not exchange names." Haya's like, "No, we're just going to wipe all that clean." And so hopefully just little bits like that, they're not laugh out loud funny, but just is enough of a, natural, good-hearted release, hopefully to balance out the darkness.
Yeah, I think the fact that she's a child.
Mm-hmm.
Even if she didn't do anything else, just the fact that she's a child and she doesn't want to stand still, and she wants to run
all these
around
little
and
games.
Yeah. She definitely feels more than a bit out of place in that kind of environment. And definitely there were moments when I'm like, how in the heck is she even there?
Yeah. And it was fun writing her chapters. It was a balancing act of like trying to come off as like this innocent child, but still not writing it like you're reading the writing of a kindergartner. And she's a little older, but she had a very, young mentality. So it was a challenge. So that was actually really interesting to try and pull off.
Sure. And I actually found her really enlightening because, as you said, she'd never really experienced the outside world. There's a moment when one of the characters mentions a bookshop to her and she has no idea what it is. And that really brought home to me, I'd never really thought about the fact that there had to have been kids like that.
Mm-hmm.
You hear all the stories of, kinder transport and kids hiding out and things like that. But the idea that there would have been a child that had never known what a bookshop was just put it in a whole different perspective for me.
Right. Yeah. So, from my timeline, she would have gone into the cellar and hiding around the age of 6 and, no memories from before that. So really all she knows is like living in the, beneath the kitchen of this family. So depressing, right? Like I'm hearing this and I know it sounds terrible, but also it just really helped preserve this innocence as, and then as a foil, Rachel's daughter, Katerina, who sat there and watched everything. She watches everything fall apart. And so if you would put Haya and Katerina together, you would have two opposite children, even though they've lived through the same thing. They're really the same age. So that was kind of interesting to create like the exact opposite of Rachel's daughter.
Well, and it's also an interesting illustration of the notion that we can experience very similar things and respond to them really differently. Yeah. So one just completely shuts down and the other one somehow manages to keep that playful spirit.
Yeah.
Which is amazing. It's really amazing. And, the other thing that strikes me, because I've definitely seen conversations about, how much did the German people know? How much did they understand? How much did they really believe because of all of the propaganda? And certainly, Terezin was used for plenty of propaganda and even managed to snow the Red Cross. But there are certainly arguments that the Red Cross kind of came in wanting to be snowed, so it wasn't even that hard. But there are moments toward the end of the book, I'm trying to figure out how to talk about this without spoiling it for anybody, where it really kind of becomes clear that, even the most brainwashed folks in that camp absolutely knew and were trying to cover themselves. And they completely knew. And maybe the people in town didn't know or tried really hard to pretend that they didn't know, and your book doesn't go into that.
Right.
But certainly, you know, the folks in the camps knew. The folks who were running it knew. And they knew that if their side didn't win, they were going to be held to account for it, and they didn't want to be.
Yeah.
And
Some
so
of them
those
hedged their bets differently.
Yeah, and so the conversations about what did people know? Well, certainly the people who were more involved, they knew. They knew. So I don't think that, splitting hairs over it. I think if you tried really hard and you were, townsfolk out in the middle of nowhere, not anywhere near where any of this stuff was happening, and you rarely ever saw a soldier, maybe you could argue that you didn't know. But even then, probably a stretch. I think everybody knew there was a war going.
Yeah.
You saw planes flying over the head at the very least.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But I think, you managed to cram an awful lot into this book.
Yeah.
You really did. It's kind of amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a lot of research and just a lot of sitting there trying to play out these scenes in my head and work it through and then make sure that the ring is featured purposefully in every chapter. It's not, the chapters aren't about the ring, but making sure that it's there because it's the driving force of the narrative and kind of the connection between the sets of characters.
So how much of this did you plot out ahead of time, and how much kind of came to you as you were writing? I don't know if you're a plotter, if you kind of are in between. I think when you're doing the historical stuff, you kind of have a built-in framework anyway.
Right.
But how does it work for you?
I'm a plotter, so I have a full-time job that is not writing books. So having an outline really helps me stay focused and motivated, especially as you have to really start and stop and just really work the writing in when you have a little bit of extra time. So I'm definitely an outliner, but as I was researching, more things were coming. I knew the basics, right? I knew the two stories. I knew Auschwitz. I knew Haya. I knew how Haya was going to fit into it. I knew Samuel and Hannah were going to be in Prague and then eventually work their way into Auschwitz. Everything about Terezin just came out of the research. So that was kind of like a beautiful added bonus that came to me, was not in the original thought that I had. And, some of the other things, like when nearing the end of the war, when they try to blow up the crematorium in Auschwitz, that was a really great opportunity to show that piece of history, but also a way to get inside the death barracks and the gas chambers. So I tried to take advantage of that. So some of those things came as I was researching, but I really had the idea start to finish, like how it was going to start, how it was going to finish from the beginning. I will tell you, the original ending that I wrote was not what's in the book. What's in the book is what I wanted. But I thought, and this is what I told my developmental editor, Ava, who's amazing. I said, I feel like if I write what I wanted to write, it's going to tie everything up in a bow too nicely. And she said, you can't tie this up too nicely. Like, you've killed too many people, too many lost souls. Like, it's not possible. Give this to the readers. Give them this, again, air quote, happy ending. Right? Somewhat fulfilling ending. So it was really great that she gave me the confidence to write the ending that I had wanted, but I hadn't written originally.
Wow. So I'm really curious now what the other ending was.
We'll have to stop recording. Can't. Yeah, we'll have to stop recording and then I'll tell you.
When we're done.
Right.
Well, I'm glad that you got to have your original ending then.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a challenge sometimes because you're right. You don't want to tie everything up too neatly.
Right.
And yet.
Or then it loses credibility, right?
Right.
I read Georgia Hunter's We Were the Lucky Ones, and I loved it. And I didn't realize how much based in truth it was. I don't know if you've read it. You really should. And the Hulu mini version or the mini series about it is awesome. But it's we were the lucky ones. And like everything works out. Eventually it's terrible, right? They're going through these awful experiences, but there is a lot of survivors for this huge family. And I just kept sitting there going, this is not possible. This is not possible. Like, not everybody makes it. And then at the end, I read her author's note, and it was like really based in fact. And then the value of that story was just overwhelming because it's such a beautiful story and it really did happen. But sometimes I think that we can't just always give our characters the happy endings that we want, because that's not realistic, especially when you're living in a time period like World War II. So that's what I was worried I was going to do. But
Yeah, and I think with World War II, you have that really fine line you have to walk, because you can also so easily make it too grim.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it's World War II. I mean,
yeah,
it was grim.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oy. I don't envy you the choices that you had to make to write this book.
Yeah.
I really, really don't. I mean, and yet there are parts of it, I mean, because obviously if you've been to Terezin, odds are really good you've been to Prague, and
right.
Prague is beautiful.
Yeah.
And so I'm picturing Prague as I'm reading this book, and walking along the Charles Bridge, and all of that is wonderful.
Yeah.
So you got to go there too. So at least you had something to balance it out, at least at the beginning.
Right. Yeah. I wanted Prague to almost be more than a setting, almost like a character, because it's just it was so fun to write such a beautiful city.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think some of the people in it are kind of like the character of the city too, and how the city changes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Rather dramatically. but yeah, it's that's the thing though. I mean, the city is still there. It's still a beautiful city. So really the people in many ways are what make it what it is.
Yeah.
So did anything other than the ending change as you were writing it?
Yeah, I added a character kind of at the very end, and that was actually Rachel's bunkmate. She was non-existent, but I really needed to get some of Rachel's thoughts out of her head and into action. And so I needed another adult that she could speak to. So that was a big addition. And then just learning about, so this is my first novel, right? So learning about taking scenes, stop telling people and really showing them. So added a couple more scenes of dialogue. Samuel's friends got to have a bigger role because, again, it was a way for me to show the changes of the city and the people by showing just, very specific characters. I think those were the main, big changes. I think for the most part, what printed was a lot of what I had originally written.
That's interesting. I think there's such a varying percentage for people from, how strictly you manage to adhere to your outline and how much other things pop up or other characters pop up, or, you think the character's going to turn right and they say, yeah, I think I'm going to turn left today. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah.
You go, but that's not in the plan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like to go for, walks. I live kind of on a small fishing lake, so walk around the lake or kind of near the fields, and just it's one of the few times where I don't have music playing or audiobooks playing or, family members talking to me and eating stuff. And that's when scenes would just come to me, and a lot of times out of order. And I would just go right back and I would write it. And then most of the time I would try and fit it in. Sometimes it just got written and then weren't used because it didn't work with what I had originally planned. But I think those are probably the most powerful scenes that I have, are the ones that I'm walking and I'm just, putting myself in the mindset of these characters and think, oh, this has to happen. This is a conversation that they're going to have, or this is a thought that they're going to have. And so I really value that as a time to find, my creative inspiration. Just I need to probably sit quietly more often, but I'm not good at that. So I have to go for a walk.
Well, walking has been, hailed as a creative tool for centuries.
Hmm.
So I'm
I
not
believe
at
it.
all
Yeah.
surprised to hear you say that that's where things were coming to you at all.
Yeah. Hmm.
And I love those moments when characters start to talk to you,
Hmm.
because that's when they always start to feel real to me. And I'm like, oh, things just got much more interesting. And you're going to start telling me what I need to know now, aren't
Yeah.
you?
Yeah.
Yeah. I would be having a hard time continuing with my walk if they started talking too much. So the fact that you managed to last until you got home is impressive.
Sometimes I feel like I'm running home, or I try to I'm not really good at the voice to talk, like the talk memos on your phone. And I always think that, okay, well, I'll just talk it out. And the second my phone starts to record, my mind goes blank. I absolutely need the keyboard or the pen and paper, which is weird because it's in my mind. It should come out of my mouth just as easily, but it doesn't. It only comes out of my fingers.
I think there is something about that because I do not take to dictation well either. And there, the keyboard for sure, pen and paper not quite as much. And I have one friend who I realized knew me really well just on a work project when I was trying to figure out how to reword something out loud and it wasn't working, and he just very quietly handed me a pencil and a piece of paper.
Oh,
And I was
that's
like,
perfect.
I'm
Yeah.
impressed. You figured it out and you are right. And as soon as I had the pencil and the piece of paper, I had it in like 20 seconds.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think we process differently on paper than
Hmm.
we do out loud. And out loud is great for some things, but it's not great for everything. And I'm not, there are plenty of people dictate their stuff, but I'm not one of them when it comes to characters. For some reason, I think actually now that I'm saying this, I think hearing the sound of my own voice blocks the sound of my characters' voices. I think that
So
might
well
be what it
said.
is, right?
Yeah.
Because I can hear their distinct voices in my head.
Right.
But if I'm hearing my own voice, I don't hear them as well. I'll bet you that's what it is.
We just had a breakthrough.
I think we might
Amazing
have.
things are happening on this podcast today.
I think that might be it.
Yeah.
Yeah. We need to be
We
able to hear them.
Yeah, I totally agree. That is well said. I've not thought of it that way, but you're right.
I had never thought of that way before either. So there we go. So if you're listening and you've always wondered, maybe that's what it is for you too.
We're just solving the world's problems right here.
That's it. That's it. So since this was your first novel, where do you think you're going to go from here? Do you think you have enough research on World War II that you're going to stick with it, or do you want to
Oh.
move on to something else?
So I just sent my second manuscript to my lovely developmental editor that I worked with in Diamonds with Diamonds in Auschwitz. So not World War II. I have to stop myself from only writing World War II. I think I could very easily pigeonhole myself there. And I really, partly for readers, right? They don't just want to read the same time period. Even I get sick of World War II eventually sometimes, and then I come back to it. But also just for me, I want to learn and write, and I want to do different things. So my second manuscript takes place in Charleston after the Revolutionary War. It's kind of like a haunted legend origin story. There's so many fascinating ghost legends in Charleston. So I took one and kind of doing how it became this ghost legend. And I overlay it with a Shakespeare tragedy. And then kind of sprinkled in a couple of other haunted legends just for fun to kind of make it. So it's not really, it wouldn't call it a ghost story. I wouldn't call it a murder mystery, but it has all of those little bit of elements to it. Still very much historical fiction. But I will go back to World War II over and over and over because I just feel like there's so many stories that still need to be told. So that I have in my head what the next 3, 4, 5, 6 books could be. And I would say I have to okay, every other can be World War II, Megan. Every other, you can't write any more than that because people will get sick of it. But yeah, I would like to go back to some of the characters in Diamonds in Auschwitz someday and do kind of a spinoff of the ones where you're but what happened? What happened to them? We never really got conclusions for those characters. So I have a whole idea of kind of a spinoff, and then we would still see some of the characters that we loved in Diamonds in Auschwitz and have like a minor role, or we get a glimpse of them and maybe in a situation that we hadn't gotten to see before. So
That sounds cool.
yeah,
And I
someday.
have to ask because you mentioned Shakespeare. Can can you tell us which Shakespeare play? Are you allowed?
Probably.
If not, it's okay.
I'm going to tell you because I think most people will forget by the time they read it, because it does kind of tell you maybe who I think the killer is. It's Othello.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I thought it was like over the top, like really hitting people on the head. And then my number one reader, my favorite reader, read it. And I said something about Othello. And she's like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm like, awesome. Okay. So it's subtle. But, she's not a Shakespeare, didn't study Shakespeare. So my college professor will probably be like, could you have made it any more obvious? But if you didn't take Shakespeare Tuesday through Thursdays at 8 a.m. at Indiana State University, you might not get it right away.
Right. Right. I mean, I'm a Shakespeare nerd too, so I'm
Yeah. So you will get it.
totally intrigued now, and you're going to have to come
Yeah.
back and we'll have to talk about this book too.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. What made you think I'm getting ahead of myself. We haven't even, you haven't even released the book, but I am curious.
Yeah.
What made you think to throw Shakespeare into post-revolutionary Charleston?
I had the idea since the time we did a haunted tour of Charleston that I wanted to write this story, this young woman's story. And I knew I wanted to add other haunted legends, and I mulled it over for 2 years, and it just was not coming together. I couldn't figure out how to switch my point of view. I couldn't figure out the motivation for the character that I think does the murdering, which is based off of the legend that I was told during the tour. And it wasn't coming together. Like it doesn't make sense to me. And then I read William Kent Kruger's This Tender Land, which is a retelling of the Odyssey. And I'm an English major, and I was probably 2/3 of the way through the book before I was like, oh my gosh, this is the Odyssey. And I was like, what an idiot. What an idiot. I think it says it on the back of the book, but I wasn't paying attention. And I loved that. And then I started to think about like classics, and you can't get past, Shakespeare is the end all be all of human motivation, right? Like he wrote it first, he wrote it best. And so when I started to think about it, I'm like, what would be the bones of this character's motivation? And that took me to Othello, and then it all kind of came together for me.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
That is so cool. And I'm, sitting here getting way ahead of myself, thinking if you're into Shakespeare and historical fiction, you've got a gold mine right there if you choose to go there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you could do so many things with that, or you could just go and write something set in Elizabethan England,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, so many geeky English major things you could do with that,
Yeah.
that you're probably not going to do because you don't have to do what I'm coming up with here at all. But, obviously we've got two English majors sitting here just being geeks now.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but no, that sounds really cool.
The hope is that the book, really speaks to my fellow Shakespearean geeks, or any sort of like really literary. There's a lot of Truman Capote like imagery from one of his lesser known novels that really helped build some of the scenery in my mind for the second book. But also, if you don't get any of that, hopefully it's just kind of a really interesting story about a young woman trying to find her place in early 1800s Charleston after the Revolutionary War, and has a little feminism, and talks about a lot about kind of being trapped, whether that's with mental illness or society norms or like literal slavery. So hopefully wherever you're at, you can find enjoyment from my books.
Sounds good to me. So I'm wondering, since you've done all of this historical research, if there's anybody listening who wants to give this a try or just is curious about a particular time period, do you have any advice on how to dig into history in a way that's not what I would do, which is just go out and Google and see what you find?
Yeah. I think that it helps. I like starting with historical fiction of that time period. I think there's a lot of mentions of real places and times and characters and situations that you can then say, all right, that's what I want to learn more about. And then you can start finding, books about that place and time or that character and just start digging in from there. I think having the overview of, a more general historical fiction novel is what can help you then start to really hone in. And then for me, when I was doing my research, I tried to focus a lot on firsthand accounts. So I read quite a few memoirs about living in Terezin and living in Auschwitz. And because that is, straight from the horse's mouth. So, I read a lot of nonfiction books, I read a lot of travel books about Prague, right? To just kind of understand just the area. But I think hearing it directly from the source is the best way to really get a handle on what life was like at that time period.
That makes sense. Do you watch any movies or documentaries? Did you get to go there?
I have not been to Prague, which I feel a little bit like a fraud. I feel a lot like a fraud because I've written all of this off of just research. And actually, I had a friend go to Prague this last fall, and she's texting me for travel tips, where should I go? And I thought she knew that I hadn't been. So I'm like, well, you need to go to St. Charles Bridge and you need to go see these synagogues and you need to go, to see the astronomical clock and all these things. And she had read a first edition, a first draft of the book. And so she is like, it's exactly like you said. And she said something about when you were there. And I was like, oh no, I've never been. And she was like, what? I'm taking advice from you and you've never even been there. So that's a little bit how I feel. But I just feel like I just had to do my research extra well, extra thorough so that I could write it with some confidence.
Well, you certainly are not the first. There are plenty of other authors who have written places that they have never been to and have done it really, really well. So, no imposter syndrome allowed here for that. None at all. I mean, I think the research for that kind of thing can be half the fun of it.
Yeah.
Really. And then you have a big list of places that are on your list to check out when you finally get to go. Yeah. So, and in your case, when you get to go, you'll be able to see your characters in all of those places, and that will be amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my book has been to Prague. I had another friend that went over spring break to Prague by chance. And so she took my book and took pictures of it and all the different places that I had written about. It was the best.
That is so cool.
Yes.
I hope that you threw them all over Instagram or whatever.
Absolutely. Yeah. I did.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. That's fantastic. I love it. I can picture them right now. Yeah. Those are the best kind of friends.
Mm-hmm.
For sure.
It was so special.
Yeah. I'll bet when you go, you'll have other ideas for other things you want to set there too.
Yeah. I think every time we come back from some sort of trip, I've got ideas and of course, that's how I came up with the second idea for Charleston, just going and spending a week in the city and falling in love with it.
Yeah. Places are characters, like we were saying earlier, I mean, they really are. They have their own energy and their own magic, and they're certainly more than capable of inspiring all sorts of ideas and characters within the character, which sounds weird, but also makes sense in its own strange, writery way. So, yeah. Well, this all sounds so exciting. I mean, I hope that people, will go and read this book. It's not a light read, but it's a really, really good, compelling read, especially, as it moves along toward the end in particular was when I really couldn't put it down. And I'm very curious to see what this next book is like. And like I said, we'll have to have you back to talk about it.
Thank you. I'd love that.
Especially as a Shakespeare geek, I'll have to go and, watch a production of Othello because it's been a long time. Gee darn. And then give it a read when it comes out. So that'll be fun. And I, wish you the best of luck with all of it.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
That's this week's episode. Thanks so much to Meg Hammond and to you. Meg's links are in the show notes. I hope you'll leave a review for this episode. There's a link in your podcast app, and it is super easy and makes such a difference. If you enjoyed our conversation, please do share it with a friend. Thank you so much. If this episode resonated with you, or if you're feeling a little bit less than confident in your creative process right now, join me at The Spark on Substack as we form a community that supports and celebrates each other's creative courage. It's free, and it's also where I'll be adding programs for subscribers and listeners. The link is in your podcast app, so sign up today. See you there, and see you next week. Follow Your Curiosity is produced by me, Nancy Norbeck, with music by Joseph McDade. If you like Follow Your Curiosity, please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to tell your friends. It really helps me reach new listeners.